Ulrich Lyndhurst was already pulling the cloak from his shoulders when Adeline Burnley's knees sank deeper into the snow. Her family's carriage had not yet rolled away. Its lanterns swung in the blue dusk, throwing yellow light over the frozen Gloucestershire road, the horse's steaming flanks, and one torn slipper half buried beside her gown. Charlotte watched from the carriage step with Adeline's leather music folio pressed to her breast. Ursula Fenwick held the door as if Adeline might soil the velvet lining. No one moved to help her. The cold had bitten through Adeline's thin muslin until her skin seemed to belong to someone else. Still, she did not shiver. Shivering was a plea, and pleas had never softened Ursula. She kept her jaw locked, eyes fixed on the frozen rut before her hands. "Do not waste another blanket on her," Ursula told the coachman. "The girl must learn gratitude. The cold is an excellent teacher." Charlotte lowered her lashes. She was wrapped in a velvet pelisse, her cheeks pink from the heated bricks inside the coach. Under her arm was the folio holding Adeline's mother's winter carol, the one Adeline had finished by candlelight after her mother died. Charlotte was to sing it at Lyndhurst House on 12th night and be praised for feeling she had never earned. Adeline had refused to surrender it, so Ursula had opened the carriage door and had her pushed into the road. Then came the thunder of hooves. A second carriage, black and uncrested, cut through the drift and halted so sharply the horses tossed their heads. A footman leaped down, but the gentleman inside moved faster. He stepped into the snow without waiting for a hand or a hat. He did not ask Ursula what had happened. He did not look to Charlotte for an explanation. He saw a woman on her knees in the snow, and he moved. He dropped before Adeline, one knee striking the road. Heavy fur lined the dark wool cloak he stripped from his shoulders. He threw it around her, sealing out the wind. Warmth struck her so suddenly she almost cried out. The cloak smelled of wood smoke, cold air, and leather. Her half-numb fingers caught on a loose black horn button at the collar. She gripped it as if it were the edge of the world. Only then did she look up. The man's face was hard with anger, but not at her. His dark eyes moved over her torn sleeve, bare wrist, and snow-damp hair. He looked as if the sight had struck him beneath the ribs. "Bring her up," he barked.
"Your Grace Ursula called,"
honey flooding her voice. "You misunderstand. My stepdaughter is unwell. It is a family matter." The Duke of Lyndhurst did not turn. "If leaving a young lady to freeze beside a road is a family matter, madam, you will find I have little respect for your family." He looked back at Adeline. "To my carriage. Now." Adeline could not answer. She let his footman lift her one hand, still clenched around the cloak. As the carriage door closed, she saw the coachman staring. Charlotte, pale and silent. Ursula's eyes narrowing with sudden, calculating satisfaction. Warmth always had a price. Ulrich Lyndhurst had just saved her life. In doing so, he had given Ursula a finer weapon than the cold. The heat of Lyndhurst House felt like a physical weight. Adeline lay in a bed wide enough for three and stared at the pale canopy. A fire roared on the hearth. Maids moved quietly, changing the hot bricks wrapped in flannel at her feet. Beyond the half-open door, the Duke's voice carried down the corridor. "I want Mr. Pelham here within the hour. Dry linen, broth, more coal, and send a note to Lady Marcham at once." He gave orders like a man trying to hold the world still by force of will. There was fear in it, though most people would hear only authority. Adeline turned toward the chair by the fire. His cloak lay folded there, dark and heavy fur, damp where the snow had melted. She opened her hand. The black horn button rested in her palm. It had come loose in the carriage. It was proof she was alive. It was also proof she had taken a duke's cloak, a duke's time, and perhaps a duke's good name. A dependent stepdaughter did not take up space. She did not sleep in great beds or bring scandal to another man's door. Adeline pushed the blankets aside. Her limbs felt bruised by cold, and a sharp throb shot through the foot that had lost its slipper in the drift. Still, she forced herself upright. A maid turned from the hearth in alarm. "Miss Burnley, you must not rise." "I only mean to fold the cloak." The maid hesitated, too well trained to seize her. Adeline crossed to the chair. Each step stung through her chilled foot, but she would not limp while anyone watched. The wool was heavier than she expected. Her fingers fumbled, and the room tilted for one dangerous second. The door opened. Ulrich Lyndhurst stepped in, without his coat, only a waistcoat, and a startlingly white shirt, his hair still damp from melted snow. He stopped when he saw her standing. "You should be in bed." Adeline stepped back from the cloak. She did not look at his face. She looked at his hands. "I must return this, Your Grace. And the button. It came away by accident." She held it out. He looked at the small black circle in her palm. Something in his jaw moved. "Keep it for now." "I cannot." "You can if I ask it." A foolish warmth rose in her throat. She swallowed it down. Kindness was safest when refused quickly. Before she could answer, carriage wheels sounded on the gravel below. A maid entered and curtsied. "Your Grace, Mrs. Fenwick has arrived. She waits in the blue drawing room. Lady Marcham's carriage has also been sent for from the Dower House." At Lady Marcham's name, Adeline understood he had thought of propriety. A widowed aunt in the house would not stop every whisper, but it would keep the worst lies from growing teeth too quickly. Ursula had not come to apologize. Ursula had come to decide which lie would be believed first. 20 minutes later, Adeline followed Ulrich to the blue drawing room with the cloak over her arm and the button hidden in her fist. Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, walked behind her. The door remained open. A footman stood in the hall. All the little rules of propriety had been placed around Adeline like thin glass. Ursula sat near the fire, a handkerchief pressed to her lips. Charlotte stood behind her chair, still holding the leather folio. "Your Grace," Ursula said, eyes darting to Adeline. "I was terrified. The poor girl's mind has been unsettled by grief. She threw herself from the carriage in a fit. To think you found her so exposed on the road." Charlotte's fingers tightened on the folio. Ursula saw Adeline notice and smiled. "The county is already talking. A duke's carriage, a duke's cloak, a young woman carried into your house at dusk. Some might say she arranged the scene to catch your eye." Ulrich took one step forward. The air sharpened. "If any man or woman says so," he said, "they will answer to me." Valiant Ursula murmured, "But you cannot fight every drawing room in Gloucestershire. The damage is done." Adeline stood very still. Every eye in the room turned toward her, not as a person, but as a problem. Ulrich looked ready to burn the county down to silence it. Then his gaze flicked to Adeline's white-knuckled hand on the cloak. He held his tongue. That was the first time she saw him fight himself. Later, in the library, Ulrich paced before the hearth. "I will ride to Fenwick House tonight. I will force her to sign a retraction. I will have every family who hears her version hear mine first." Adeline sat in a high-backed leather chair near the fire. Lady Marcham had arrived, silver-haired and watchful, and now slept in the adjoining morning room after declaring that no niece of grief would be bullied under her nephew's roof. The words had been kind. Adeline did not know what to do with them. "No," she said. Ulrich stopped. "No. Loud defense only gives her a louder scandal to shape. Adeline kept her hands folded in her lap. If a duke threatens a widow over a penniless girl, society will not ask whether the widow is cruel. It will ask what hold the girl has over the duke. She cast you into the snow, and if you shout that, she will say, I made you shout it. The fire snapped. You have the power to command a room, Your Grace, Adeline said. I only have the power to endure one. He crossed the carpet, then stopped short of her chair. He looked at her frayed, borrowed cuff and careful stillness. He did not call her ungrateful. What did she take from you before the carriage? He asked. For one moment, Adeline's armor slipped. My mother's song, she whispered. A winter carol. Charlotte is to sing it at your 12th night ball, and call it a Fenwick composition. You wrote it? My mother wrote the first verses. I finished the setting after she died. There is a last verse Charlotte is never seen. Her mouth tightened. I kept that much from them, because memory is harder to steal than paper. Ulrich turned toward the fire. His shoulders went rigid. He wanted to cancel the ball. She could feel it. He wanted riders, solicitors, and threats. But he had heard her. The program will be reviewed, he said at last. Not cancelled. Adeline looked at his broad back. He was still angry, but he was holding the anger back because she had asked him to. His restraint moved her more deeply than the rescue had. For 2 days, Adeline remained at Lyndhurst House, recovering. Lady Marcham occupied the morning room with embroidery and a stare sharp enough to cut bread. Mrs. Vale sent broth and dry stockings. A maid named Bess sat with Adeline in the evenings, so no one could say the Duke had forgotten propriety. Ulrich did not hover. That unsettled her most. He appeared only when there was a reason to ask whether the physician's draught was too bitter, to tell Mrs. Vale the corridor fire smoked, to have a screen moved because the window draught struck the chair where Adeline always sat. He noticed things she had not meant to reveal. On the 3rd afternoon, he had her moved to the music room. He claimed the chimney there drew better. A practical excuse spoken in his brusque way. Adeline knew kindness when it wore a plain coat. The room was pale and large, with windows overlooking frosted lawns and bare yew trees. A rosewood pianoforte stood near the center. Adeline did not touch it. She stood by the window, the black button in her pocket, and under her breath. The tune began plainly. Her mother had liked plain beginnings. Then the melody turned tender and aching, like a candle cupped against winter. The door hinge creaked. Adeline stopped at once and stepped away from the window. Ulrich stood in the doorway. Do not stop. I forgot myself. Then forget yourself again. The words were blunt, almost rude. Somehow they were kinder than praise. She looked at the pianoforte, then away. It was the carol. I know. You cannot know. You have never heard it. I heard enough to know it was not Charlotte Fenwick's. Adeline turned toward him. He offered no easy comfort. He simply stood there, certain of what he had heard. My stepmother calls it family property, she said. His eyes darkened. Is that what she calls you? The question was too accurate. Adeline's fingers curled into her skirt. I am family property, Your Grace. Why should my music be any different? He walked to the pianoforte and rested one hand on the polished wood, but he did not open it. He did not command her to play. When you are ready, he said, this room will be open. That was all. After he left, Adeline stood in the quiet. The music room door remained ajar. Not wide, not forced open, simply not shut. She put one finger on middle C and let the note sound. The quiet did not last. Ursula and Charlotte came to Lyndhurst House the next morning under the excuse of reviewing the ballroom arrangements. Lady Marcham was upstairs with a headache. Ulrich had ridden to the far lodge to settle a tenant's complaint. Ursula chose her hour well. They found Adeline in the long gallery, where dead Lyndhursts watched from gilt frames. "You look well for a girl on the edge of ruin," Ursula said. Adeline dipped a curtsy. "Mrs. Fenwick." The politeness struck harder than defiance. Ursula's eyes narrowed. Charlotte looked away. In her hand, she carried the printed proof of the program folded small. Adeline saw only the edge before Charlotte tucked it into her muff. Ursula stepped close and gripped Adeline's arm. "Let us take the air. A respectable girl should not linger indoors near a bachelor duke. People are already calling you his charity." She pulled Adeline toward the terrace doors. Charlotte followed, pale and silent. The glass doors opened onto frost-silvered stone. Wind came off the hills with a knife in it. Adeline wore only a borrowed indoor gown. The cold went through her at once. Ursula shoved her outside. "Stay there until you remember your place," she. "If you breathe a word about the carol, I will make every house in London hear how you threw yourself at Lyndhurst for a warm bed." Charlotte's mouth trembled. "Mamma, be quiet." The doors clicked shut. Adeline stood on the terrace. Her breath came white and thin. She clasped her hands together until her knuckles ached. She would not knock. She would not give Ursula the pleasure of watching her beg to be let in. Inside the hall, Ulrich came down the stairs sooner than expected, snow still on his boots from the lodge road. He saw Ursula and Charlotte crossing the gallery. He saw the empty room. Then through the glass, he saw Adeline. Rage struck him so hard he almost welcomed it. He seized the heavy wool cloak from a hall chair. He would cover her, pull her inside, make Ursula Fenwick regret every breath she had spent on cruelty. He opened the terrace door. The wind rushed in. Adeline turned. She saw the cloak in his hand and the fury in his eyes. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Not again. If he wrapped her in the cloak now, if he carried her in before witnesses, the story would be written for her again. Helpless girl, bachelor duke, warmth as proof of guilt. Ulrich froze. Every instinct strained forward. His fingers tightened on the wool until the seams creaked. Then he looked at her face. Not her cold, her will, not her weakness. Slowly, he let the cloak fall inside the doorway. He stepped onto the terrace and shut the door behind him. He wore no coat. The wind flattened the linen against his chest. He walked to the stone balustrade and stood beside her. He did not touch her. He simply stood in the same cold. Adeline stared at him. "You will freeze, Your Grace." "Then we shall be very foolish together." His breath whitened. "But I will not make a spectacle of your suffering to soothe mine." They stood in silence while winter worked on them both. At last, Ulrich said, "My mother was left outside once." Adeline turned. She married a man who valued pride more than breath. There was a quarrel in London, a rumor. He locked the doors because he believed being obeyed mattered more than mercy. It was December. She stood outside for 3 hours before a neighbor took her in. The cold settled in her lungs by the week's end. His voice remained controlled, but control had become a bandage pulled tight over a wound. "I cannot bear to see someone left outside," he said. "But I will not force you in if you do not choose to enter." Adeline closed her eyes. The cold remained. So did the stone beneath her feet, the wind on her face, the ache in her hands. But something inside the cold changed. He was not rescuing her from it. He was refusing to leave her alone in it. "Thank you," she whispered. Not for saving her, for standing still. 10 minutes later, they were back in the music room. The fire cracked loudly. Adeline stood near the hearth, flexing feeling back into her fingers. Ulrich remained several paces away, as if distance were a duty he meant to keep. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the black horn button. "I kept this," she said. He looked at it. "So I see. You keep throwing cloaks over people," Adeline said, "because no one opened a door for your mother." He flinched. The truth had found the place his rank could not guard. "But I do not need to be carried, Your Grace." She closed her fingers around the button. "I have spent my whole life earning corners of rooms I was never meant to enjoy. If I take your cloak every time they push me out, I remain the girl in the snow. I need the door left open. I need to walk through it myself." Ulrich looked at her for a long moment. "I do not know how to stand still when someone is freezing," he said. "You did it on the terrace." "Badly." A breath almost became a laugh in her chest. It hurt. It was still welcome. A knock sounded. The head footman entered with a silver tray. "The final order of music for 12th night, Your Grace, returned from the printer." Ulrich took the sheet. His expression changed. He handed it to Adeline. There, in bold black ink, stood the theft made respectable, A Winter Carol, performed by Miss Charlotte Fenwick, composed by the Fenwick family. Adeline read it twice. The words did not change. If she spoke at the ball, Ursula would call her jealous, unstable, ruined. If she remained silent, the last piece of her mother would be taken into rooms where Adeline had never been welcome. Ulrich did not snatch the paper back. He did not promise to fix it. "What will you do?" he asked. The question frightened her more than an order. "I do not know," she whispered. "Then the door remains open until you do." 12th night brought half the county to Lyndhurst House. The ballroom glowed with candlelight and evergreen garlands. Pine scented the warm air. Silk whispered over polished floorboards. The world looked gentle when one had never been pushed from it. Adeline stood near the tapestries in a plain, pale gray gown Mrs. Vale had helped her alter. The stitches were her own. The hem was clean. No one could accuse it of inviting attention, so they accused it of pleading for pity instead. Across the room, Charlotte shone in silver silk. Ursula held court near the punch bowl, her voice pitched for 3 dowagers and 2 ambitious mothers. "Such a pity about the Burnley girl," she said. "The Duke was kind to pick her out of the snow, of course, but some girls mistake charity for preference. To linger here under his roof, even with Lady Marcham present, well, one wonders if the snow was a stage." Adeline heard every word. So did the room. Heads turned by small degrees. Fans paused. A young man, about to ask someone to dance, thought better of crossing the space near her. Judgment did not arrive as a shout. It arrived as distance. Her chest tightened. For a moment, she was back on the road, the carriage lantern swinging Charlotte with the folio, Ursula with the open door. She slipped through a side door into the servants' corridor. The passage was narrow and cold after the ballroom. She leaned one hand against the plaster and closed her eyes. She could leave. If she vanished tonight, the scandal might settle into a story about a foolish girl dismissed from a noble house. It would hurt less than standing in the center of it. Footsteps sounded on the flagstones. Ulrich found her in the dim corridor. His first instinct showed at once. He stepped forward. "I will have my carriage brought round. My aunt has friends in Bath. You need not endure them another hour." There it was again. The cloak. The carriage. the merciful removal. Adeline opened her eyes. Ulrich saw her face and stopped. He looked at his own outstretched hand as if it had betrayed him. Then he lowered it. He took one step back. "Do you want to leave?" he asked slowly. "Or do you want to return?" No one had ever asked her that before. Not where to go, not what would be safest, what she wanted. Beyond the door, the pianoforte sounded a testing chord. The carol was coming. Her mother's carol. Her own last verse hidden in memory where Ursula could not reach it. Adeline looked down at her gray gown. She saw the careful mending at the cuff, the plain skirt Mrs. Vale had pressed smooth, the small places where poverty and patience had left their marks. Then she looked at Ulrich, the dark evening coat, the starched linen, the name that could open every door in the county. If she returned beside him, they would not only laugh at her, they would laugh at him for choosing her. They would say a duke had been snared by a girl with no dowry, no guardian worth naming, and no better weapon than a song. For one sharp moment, leaving seemed kinder. She could spare him, disappear before his name became joined to hers in every cruel mouth. Her fingers moved to her pocket, where the black button rested against her palm. No. If she left now, Ursula would not merely keep the song. She would keep the story. She would make Adeline's silence sound like guilt, and Ulrich's kindness sound like folly. Adeline had survived the snow. She would not let warmth become another cage. She lifted her chin. "Return." Ulrich did not lead her through the servants' door. He escorted her around to the main entrance of the ballroom, where every person would see her arrive. When the doors opened, the footman struck his staff. The room turned. Adeline walked in with her hand resting lightly on the Duke's arm. She did not hide behind him. She kept her chin level, though her pulse beat hard enough to shake her throat. Ursula's face darkened. "Your Grace," she said sharply, "this is highly inappropriate. The girl is compromised. She uses your charity to mock her betters. She has already taken enough from you." The room held its breath. Ulrich did not shout. That was worse for Ursula. He spoke with a calm so controlled it rang against the walls. "No guest in my house will call cruelty propriety," he said, "and no one will speak of Miss Burnley as though she is not present." Then he did the hardest thing he had learned to do. He unlinked Adeline's hand from his arm, stepped back, and left her standing alone in the center of the room. Visible, unsheltered, free to move. The master of ceremonies, with desperate cheer, "The next performance, Miss Charlotte Fenwick, A Winter Carol." Charlotte crossed to the pianoforte. The silver of her gown shimmered under the candles. She sat, placed her gloved hands near the keys, then removed the gloves. Her fingers trembled. She struck the first chord. It was flat. A faint stir passed through the room. Charlotte began the opening line. Her voice was pretty. She had been taught prettiness. But the song asked for something plainer and deeper than training. It asked for the weight of a winter one had survived. She reached the second verse and faltered. The stolen folio had given her notes. It had not given her grief. Ursula's face hardened. "Begin again," she whispered. Charlotte tried. Her voice cracked. The silence afterward was terrible. Adeline stepped forward. Each step sounded too loud. She passed Ursula. She passed Charlotte. She stopped beside the pianoforte and looked at the accompanist. "May I?" she asked. The man looked toward the Duke. Ulrich did not answer for her. He only met the accompanist's gaze until the man remembered whose house he stood in and stepped aside. Adeline did not sit. She faced the room. She did not look at Ulrich. She looked at the people who had judged her from a safe distance. Then she sang. Not loudly, not theatrically. The first notes were clear and restrained, almost bare. They moved through the ballroom without asking permission. The carol was Winter at a closed door. It was a candle in a room no one had offered. It was a mother's hand remembered after the hand was gone. The room changed as it listened. Fans lowered. A dowager near the fireplace pressed fingers to her mouth. Lady Marcham sat very straight, her eyes wet and fierce. Adeline sang the verses Charlotte had stolen. Then she sang the last verse. Ursula's head snapped up. It was not in the folio. It had never been on the pages Charlotte held. Adeline had carried it alone for years, changing one note every winter until grief became something that could stand upright. When the final note faded, no one moved. Adeline let the silence remain. For once, silence belonged to her. Then she looked directly at Ursula. "I was left in the snow," she said, her speaking voice as clear as the song had been, "because I would not give away the last thing that was mine." The first verses were written by my mother, Mary Burnley. The last was written by me. This carol does not belong to the Fenwick family. It never did. Ursula opened her mouth. No sound came. Charlotte remained by the bench, one hand on the stolen folio. Her eyes darted to her mother. Ursula's stare was a command. For one strained breath, Charlotte stood where she had always stood, between fear and obedience, choosing silence because silence was easier. Then her fingers tightened around the folio, and something in her face broke. She lifted it from the music stand. Slowly, with shaking hands, she held it out to Adeline. "I am sorry," she whispered. It was not enough. It could not mend the road, the cold, or the years of small thefts. But it was public, and it was not forced from her. Adeline took the folio. The room saw it happen. That mattered. Only then did Ulrich walk forward. He stopped before Adeline. He did not offer his cloak. He did not take the folio from her. He offered his hand, palm open. "Miss Burnley," he said, voice steady enough for the far gallery to hear, "if you choose warmth beside me, I will spend my life leaving the door open." Adeline looked at his hand. She looked at the man who had learned to stand still so she could walk. Then she placed her hand in his. "I choose it," she said. This time, no one could pretend she had been carried. 3 weeks later, snow began to melt from the yew branches outside the estate chapel. It was a small wedding. Ursula Fenwick did not attend. Charlotte sent a stiff note in a careful hand. It did not mend everything, but it included the word apology, and Adeline kept it folded between 2 blank pages of the old folio. Some things did not deserve forgiveness at once. Some things deserved to be witnessed, and then laid aside. Mr. Pelham Ulrich's solicitor had discovered what Ursula had preferred forgotten. The modest sum left by Mary Burnley had never belonged to the Fenwicks. It was not a fortune. It was enough for Adeline to choose her own gown, her own gloves, and a small locked box for her mother's music. That was wealth of a kind. Adeline stood in the vestibule of the chapel, wearing ivory wool. No heavy cloak covered her. No borrowed grandeur weighed her down. Lady Marcham adjusted one sleeve, pretended not to cry, and called the stitchwork serviceable because she would rather be brisk than sentimental. Adeline. At the altar, Ulrich waited. He looked impossibly handsome, but not untouchable. The restless force in him had not vanished. It never would. It had simply learned where to place itself, not over her, beside her. When Adeline reached him, she drew something from her sleeve. A narrow white ribbon lay across her palm. Sewn securely at its center was the black horn button. Ulrich looked down at it. His throat moved. "It is not a debt returned," Adeline whispered. "It is proof that I remember the night you found me, and proof that I chose to walk here today." He took the ribbon with a care that made her chest ache. Beneath his waistcoat, over his heart. He tied it when no one else would see. "I will know it is there," she said. "So will I." The vows were spoken. The priest blessed them. Outside, the thaw dripped steadily from the chapel roof, small sounds of winter loosening its grip. When they turned to leave, they reached the heavy chapel door together. Ulrich's hand closed around the iron handle. He pulled the door wide open. Crisp air rushed in, smelling of pine, wet earth, and the first green promise beneath the snow. He did not pull her forward. He did not throw a coat over her. He stepped back, smiled at his wife, and let her cross the threshold first.